Nuestra historia comienza en 1994. Nacemos con el objetivo de contribuir al sector pecuario mediante la comercialización de materias primas para mejorar el desempeño animal. A partir de 1995 empezamos a desarrollar y comercializar suplementos mineralizados adaptados a las deficiencias nutricionales de cada región de nuestro país. En 2006 nace nuestro Centro de Investigación para la Nutrición Animal, SINMEX. La posibilidad de realizar pruebas in vitro e in situ para materias primas y producto terminado nos permiten realizar investigación y desarrollo de soluciones para diferentes especies y nos impulsa a continuar ofreciendo materias primas de calidad probada y comprobada en nuestro propio proceso productivo. En 2010 iniciamos la expansión de nuestras fronteras, llegando a mercados de Sur y Centroamérica. Nuestra planta para el almacenamiento y transformación de materia prima está ubicada estratégicamente en el municipio de Malambo, cerca de los puertos de Pinza y Barranquilla. Somos importadores y comercializadores de materias primas minerales y orgánicas para mejorar la nutrición y el desempeño animal. Tenemos relaciones sólidas con proveedores internacionales y nacionales confiables que respaldan la cadena de abastecimiento de nuestros clientes para brindar tranquilidad y confianza en sus actividades productivas. Estamos al servicio del sector pecuario. Nuestra misión es generar confianza, nuestra visión, obtener lealtad, nuestro propósito, la eficiencia en nutrición animal para más y mejor alimento en cada familia. SOMEX, materias primas, estamos para servirles.
Vamos a iniciar de una vez la presentación. Me alegra mucho que podamos compartir nuevamente este espacio. El principal objetivo es irnos uniendo más. Tenemos que ir de la mano en este momento en el que estamos y finalmente que podamos continuar aportando desde cada uno de nuestros negocios, desde cada uno de nuestros sectores, al desarrollo de nuestro sector, del sector agroalimentario de nuestro país. Mi nombre es Santiago Uribe, yo soy director comercial para marcas privadas y materias primas SOMEX. Les recuerdo que desde marcas privadas estamos con las puertas abiertas de nuestra casa para el desarrollo de negocios en conjunto. Los invito a conocer más de nuestros servicios en nuestro sitio web www.marcasprivadas.somex.com.co. Por otro lado, desde materias primas SOMEX estamos poniendo a disposición de todos ustedes nuestra cadena de abastecimiento. Ofrecemos materias primas para la elaboración de suplementos y alimentos balanceados para animales. También los invitamos a que entren a nuestro sitio y conozcan nuestros productos y los servicios que les ofrecemos. www.materiasprimas.somex.com.co. La semana pasada estuvimos hablando un poco sobre el uso de complejos enzimáticos con el objetivo de reducir los costos en formulación. Estuvimos viendo cómo utilizando complejos enzimáticos que tal vez no son una tecnología nueva, pero es una tecnología que toma vigencia dado el contexto que tenemos en estos momentos de materias primas caras y escasas, nos permite. Listo, perfecto. Entonces, a quien no haya podido ver el primer conversatorio que tuvimos, donde estuvimos hablando de complejos enzimáticos, puede escribirnos a nuestro correo, a nuestros números de WhatsApp que van a estar ahí en el chat y nosotros con mucho gusto se los haremos llegar. Hoy vamos a profundizar en un producto fundamental para nuestra actividad pecuaria. Manejar una fuente adecuada para el aporte de fósforo tiene un impacto directo en crecimiento, en desarrollo de huesos, en sistema reproductivo y en el sistema neurológico de nuestros animales. Por eso, la decisión de compra de este producto debe ir más allá de revisar cuál es el precio por kilo y tenemos que enfocarnos en cuál es la relación costo-beneficio, que realmente ahí es donde está la ganancia y ahí es donde está el ahorro. Para acompañarnos a profundizar en este tema, hoy vamos a tener el acompañamiento de nuestro aliado, un aliado de tradición con el que venimos de la mano durante muchos años, con el que sentimos un gran respaldo en cuanto a abastecimiento, en cuanto a calidad y a estabilidad en el producto, que es la compañía canadiense Nutrien. Nutrien es la empresa más grande productora de sal de potasio, nitrógeno y fosfato en conjunto, con una producción de 26 millones de toneladas anuales. En su equipo de trabajo cuenta con 25.000 colaboradores. Nutrien tiene toda la experiencia y el conocimiento para el uso adecuado de fosfatos para alimentación animal. Hoy tenemos, y le doy la bienvenida y el agradecimiento por todo el apoyo y por todo el acompañamiento a los señores Edward Lee, al señor Benjamin Audet, que hoy nos van a acompañar en esta presentación. Vamos a tener una intervención más o menos de unos 10 minutos del señor Benjamin, donde nos va a contar la realidad que estamos viviendo en el mercado de las materias primas y cómo se ha relacionado esto con el impacto en cuanto a fosfato. Luego vamos a tener la intervención del señor Edward Lee, que va a ayudarnos a profundizar en el tema técnico, cuáles son los elementos que debemos evaluar para escoger una fuente adecuada de fosfato para cada uno de nuestros negocios. Finalmente, vamos a tener un espacio de preguntas de unos 10 o 15 minutos. Yo los invito a que en el transcurso de la presentación, en el chat de aquí de Zoom, vayan escribiendo sus preguntas para nosotros irlas organizando. También es muy importante, el señor Edward Lee y Benjamin Audet no hablan español, solo hablan inglés, pero aquí en Zoom, en la parte inferior, al lado del iconito que tiene compartir pantalla, al lado derecho, hay un icono que dice traducción. Si ustedes dice interpretación, si ustedes le dan clic ahí, pueden escoger si quieren escuchar esta conferencia en inglés o la quieren escuchar en español con nuestra traducción simultánea que estamos teniendo con el apoyo del señor Luis Cáceres. Entonces, yo les doy la bienvenida. Nuevamente, muchas gracias a Nutrien por acompañarnos. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Edward y Benjamin tienen todo el conocimiento, la disposición para resolver todas las preguntas que tengan. Esperamos que este evento sea de valor para ustedes. Bienvenidos a todos.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for taking the time to attend our presentation. It's quite an honor for us to be here to present at this conference for such a long-time customer of many decades with Somex. You know, we want to give you a quick overview of our company, followed by a quick commercial update, looking at some of our production sites, and then, as Santiago mentioned, Edward Lee will be here to give you some more of a technical presentation. Next slide, please. So this is something our lawyers put in there for us. No need to, you can go to the next slide. You know, before we start the video, I first just wanted to share a video overview with you of our biggest phosphate operation. We produce over 60 products there for the animal feed industry, fertilizer, and also industrial industries as well. You know, the high quality defluorinated phosphoric acid that we produce at this plant, it's one of the only sites that can produce this quality of defluorinated phosphoric acid in the US. It goes into our Midwest feed plant operation where we produce calcium phosphates and thus is exported to Somex in Colombia. So I'm going to give you a quick, this video. It's a pretty good overview into the sheer size of the operation, and hopefully you can learn a little bit about our operation.
Nutrien serves a big world with growing needs. As the planet's population grows to nearly 10 billion people by 2050, Nutrien is committed to meeting these agricultural needs efficiently and sustainably. At Nutrien Aurora, we're feeding the future, and our facility plays an important role in that effort. In 2018, Potash Corp and Agrium merged to form Nutrien, the largest crop nutrient production and distribution operation on Earth. The Aurora facility is part of the production process and includes a phosphate mine, or refining and production facilities that make products for the agriculture, animal nutrition, food, and industrial chemical markets. Phosphate, a key ingredient in fertilizer, is used to improve plant productivity and crop yields. It's also an important supplement in animal feed, ensuring strong bones and improving eggshell strength and quality. While the Aurora site is mostly known for producing liquid and dry fertilizer, our phosphate is also used in food and industrial products. Phosphate is a nutrient we rely on every day. As one of the area's largest private employers, with an annual payroll of $75 million, Nutrien is important to the local economy. In addition to contributing approximately $7 million in state and local taxes, the Aurora site also spends tens of millions of dollars locally and throughout the state, purchasing various goods and services. It requires more than 845 permanent employees and hundreds of contract workers to operate our expansive complex, with safety as our top priority. Our safety vision is focused on building one of the world's strongest safety cultures. We strive for an incident-free workplace where we all go home safe every day. This vision is supported by 3 principles: to do it safely or not at all, because there's always time to do it safely, and to care for each other's safety and health. Our priorities include safety leadership, hazard identification, frequent and structured pauses, and serious injury and fatality prevention. These efforts have been recognized by the NC Department of Labor, as well as the National Mine, Safety, and Health Administration, and many other safety-focused organizations as a best practices facility. In operation for more than 50 years, the plant is located adjacent to the largest natural phosphate deposit in the United States. A unique feature of Nutrien Aurora is the close proximity of the mine to the plant site, allowing the ore to be transported easily to the processing facilities. The phosphate ore lies more than 100 feet below the Earth's surface. To access the ore, mining begins with pre-stripping the upper 45 feet of clay soils, which is transported by 40-ton haul trucks, where it's used in previously mined areas to begin the reclamation process. After pre-stripping, drag lines remove the additional 60 to 75 feet of overburden to uncover the phosphate ore, which is about 35 feet thick and visible as a strip of dark, sandy material. Drag lines weigh about 9 million pounds and are powered by 4 2,000 horsepower electric motors. The huge dragline bucket can scoop up to 2,500 pickup truck loads of dirt every hour and is roughly the size of a 2-car garage. After excavation, rocks are separated from the ore, and water is incorporated to break up and turn the small granules into a slurry that's pumped through pipes to the mill. There, the phosphate ore is screened to remove oversized materials and washed to remove the clay. Then, through a process called flotation, the sand is separated from the ore, and the remaining materials are mixed with a surfactant that brings the phosphate to the surface on bubbles of air. These bubbles are skimmed off by paddle wheels and then distributed throughout the facility for additional processes based on the final desired product. In some cases, the ore is further refined through calcination, which removes the organic matter by heating it to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Other products require the phosphate to be mixed with sulfuric acid. The plant receives molten sulfur that's converted to sulfuric acid to be combined with the phosphate concentrate, producing various grades of phosphoric acid. Aurora's No. 7 sulfuric acid plant, constructed in 2010, one of the largest in North America, is also the most energy efficient. Heat created from the process is used to make steam, generating electricity for various processes throughout the plant. This is just one of our many efforts to sustain the environment and continue the company-wide commitment to maintaining low-cost, high-quality production. As part of Nutrien's commitment to greatness, we maintain several on-site labs which operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to ensure all products meet quality specifications. Moving tons of product in and out of the site makes transportation an enormous part of our day-to-day operations. We rely on transfer trucks, ocean-going vessels from the port of Morehead City, barges propelled by tugboats moving along the Intracoastal Waterway, and an extensive rail complex connected to major rail systems that travel throughout North American markets. Nutrien believes in sustainable land use. Annually, we invest millions of dollars and thousands of hours into land reclamation, wetland mitigation, and environmental initiatives, monitoring, and research. As part of our environmental efforts, a multi-million-dollar water recycling system virtually eliminates nutrient discharge from the mining and production process. Any water pumped out of the mine that is not used in the mine or production process flows directly into the Pamlico River in its natural form. Water that is used in the manufacturing process is contained on the plant site and recycled for further use. During the phosphoric acid production process, gypsum is generated. Nutrien Aurora has pioneered a land reclamation process that blends the gypsum with clay to reclaim and revegetate previously mined land. Nutrien Aurora's reclamation success has earned the company 4 national and 5 North Carolina awards. Understanding the value of wetlands to North Carolina's ecology, Nutrien is dedicated to recovering the phosphate resource with no net loss of wetlands. Our most recent permit has a wetland replacement ratio of 2 to 1, meaning for every acre of wetland impacted, 2 are replaced. Our site has been active in wetland mitigation since 1984, and during the past 25 years has successfully restored or created more than 8,600 wetland acres. We hope this video has provided you with valuable insight into Nutrien, our Aurora facility, and the products we produce.
And just wanted to quickly go over our global facilities. So as Santiago mentioned, we have over 26 million metric tons of combined sales in potash, nitrogen, and phosphate. We have over 29 production sites in North America and Trinidad. And then we also are one of the largest agricultural retailers of fertilizer in the world, with retail operations in North America, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and Australia. Quickly focusing on our two phosphate mines on the East Coast. We have Aurora, North Carolina, which you saw the video, and also one in White Springs, northern Florida. That's where we produce the main feedstock of difluorinated phosphoric acid that would go into our Midwest feed plants. And the 3 brown dots in the middle of the U.S. there are our feed plants where we will rail the phosphoric acid, and then we'll be able to produce the calcium phosphates at those feed plants and then export them to Colombia and other international markets. Here you can see 2 pictures. That on the left is a picture of our Marseilles feed phosphate production facility. That's where we produce all of our feed phosphate for Colombia. And on the right, you can see a satellite image of our Aurora phosphate facility. It is truly one of the largest. Next slide, please. So, something our market research people put together is they look at some of the macroeconomic trends among agricultural crop prices, as well as fertilizers, and then also looking at some of the other commodities. So the slide below really just looks at the macroeconomic environment and the strength and consumption of all these current commodities that we kind of track. And you can see on the chart on the left is just showing how fertilizers have taken a significant rebound recently over the past year. And then you also look at how crop prices are correlated to that as well, with corn and soybean prices and index in the middle. And then hard commodities, which we know are not related strictly to agriculture and fertilizer, but just showing the overall commodity prices booming that we've seen recently. Next slide, please. So just strictly focusing on crop prices, we're seeing some record prices that we have not seen in the last 7 or 8 years. You can look at across the board from some of the major commodities that we track on corn, soybean, cotton, and wheat and palm oil. All of those prices are up year over year. Next slide, please. Something we also look at is kind of the supply and demand picture for corn and soybean, which is kind of the main two crops that we track in North America. The two graphs on the left can show you how low inventories of corn and soybeans currently are, thus putting a lot of pressure right now on prices to continue to increase potentially. And then the slide on the right, you can see, if you look at the green line, which is the line at the very top, that is the current corn and soybean export sales this year. And you can see how far above average. All of these low inventories and high exports are really putting a squeeze on corn and commodity prices and continuing to make them very firm. Next slide, please. So another place we also look at is some of the structural changes in demand in China. Recently the Chinese had really was significantly affected by African swine flu, and they've been trying to rebuild their hog herd. And if you can look at the chart on the left, I mean, what we see right there is them rebuilding the hog herd. And then on the graph on the bottom left, you can see they have tripled the amount of imports of corn in the 2020 and 21 year thus far, and also are having a record year on soybean imports, but still not as significant as some of the corn imports they have been bringing in. And then if you look at the bottom right there, you can see that the Chinese have been running a deficit on both on corn production, thus having to continue to import more and continue to drive for more use of corn. Next slide, please. Another major market we look at for agricultural and commodity growth is Brazil. If we look at the chart on the bottom left, for the first time ever, or at least first time in the last 6 years, Brazil has had to import soybeans. And so you can see the green line there, that's the exports for 2021. It started at zero inventory. And it's been, most years they've had at least some carryover year over year. And now they've ended the year at zero and actually had to import soybean from the US. And then the top right graph, you can see that because of this increased demand globally and also in China, they are continuing to plant more acres of corn and soybean, thus commanding a lot more nutrients to replenish that soil and driving more demand for phosphate and other fertilizer products. If we go to the next slide, you can see that these high prices are also supported by these high fertilizer and phosphate prices are also supported by high crop prices. And you can see this slide just basically shows you why farmers are planting and why they're motivated to plant and buy these products, because of the margins they're actually making on corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, and canola. All main commodities that we track and the margins are continued up. So it's just also causing a lot of competition. Next slide, please. Just focusing a little bit on phosphate and some of the robust demand we've seen there. You can see that both phosphate imports in India and the phosphate imports in Brazil are up year over year. Next slide. Now, all of these recent price increases are not just they're also come with extra. Basically, they come with extra cost of goods as well. Our cost of goods are up significantly, as well as transportation. And I have two charts here. The chart on the left is the cost of sulfur, which is actually sulfuric acid is a main ingredient in producing phosphoric acid. And you can see the cost of sulfur is up around 450% this year. And thus we've had to increase a lot of our raw material costs. And the chart on the right is called the Baltic Dry Earnings Index. It's basically an index that tracks ocean freight. And some of the different color lines are the different sizes of vessels. You have everything from the large iron ore carriers on the yellow to Panamax, which in the blue. But the two lines that we really track and that we see a lot of these commodities shipped on are the blue and the dark, kind of the yellow line, the two lines on the right. The point it really is that transportation, whether it's containers, trucks, or ocean going vessels, is all up significantly, thus driving up some of these costs of raw materials as well. Next slide. That basically, kind of summarizes things for you guys. And one of the things that, I just want to kind of give you a quick introduction. But before I do that, I just want to thank everybody for their business to Somex. Thank everybody for their continued support of our high quality products. And we do appreciate what you guys are doing in Colombia. I wish we could be there in person, and hopefully someday we can continue to do that. Without further ado, though, I think this next presenter, his name is Edward Lee. He's one of our technical specialists on the feed side of things. And Edward was actually born in Malaysia, came to the US for school, and then after graduating school from the University of Nebraska, ended up at one of our production sites on feed. So Edward knows everything all the way from the production to sales. And now he's been in our sales and technical role for the past several years. He has a master's in animal science from North Carolina State University, and he's here to give you the technical talk. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Ben, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I just want to thank you all for your time this afternoon to allow me to share some of the things that I've done in the past, and share some of the nutrition in phosphorus and some of the things we look into and how we evaluate our phosphate. As Ben has alluded to, I have an experience in chemical engineering. That's my undergraduate degree, and I have my master's in animal science. So with that, I'm able to tie the production of phosphates to actually the nutrition value. So without further ado, let's look at what we'll be looking at today. Today we're going to share on how you evaluate commercial phosphates. As we all know, today's feeding practices focus on animal performance as gains. In today's review, we'll look at how gains and performance gain, body weight gains in animal can offset feed costs. Our role as nutrient, being a nutrition supplier, is to produce and provide a stable, reliable, and biological available product to the animal. So as we all know, that today's feeding practices focus on the least cost formulation, from the ingredient cost where we purchase and the ingredients that we purchase, all the way to the process yield or slaughter body weight. That's how we need to evaluate the whole supply chain and what we do every step of the way. We, as an ingredient producer and ingredient supplier, will focus on the value of the nutrient itself. Obviously, we know and understand that our product is also mixed in the feed mills, and it's also goes through certain conditions like pelleting, delivery, truck delivery, and feed delivery. So all the steps along the way, we realize that there might be things that can impact performance gains eventually at the end when we send it to the slaughterhouse. But what we're focused on today is the value of the nutrition of the ingredients itself. Why is that important? It is important because feed cost is high, especially in this high price commodity environment. And as a general rule, the feed is normally 70% of the animal production cost. It's only natural that we focus on getting the best, most nutritious product for our animals, since it's such a big cost, right? There are three most expensive feed ingredients as the general rule of thumb. The energy being the most part of the feed. It carries the most weight per ton. It's the most expensive. It's followed closely by protein. And phosphates is generally the third most expensive ingredient per ton of feed. So in today, we'll be spending some time to evaluate why we need it and what does that phosphate does for us in the animals. Phosphates is required from 1 to 3% of the animal's diet, and it varies based on the age of the animal, the type of animal, and whatnot. It is available in small quantities of the body weight, and this is also species dependent. But in generally speaking, the function of phosphates is important. It is it's responsible for protein synthesis, so putting on body weight. It is very important in bone formation, and I'll show you why later. And it's also important in the reproductive function of the animal. And to some lesser degree, it's also important. It's used in the neurotransmission and reception, so brain functions. All that has been shown. And if you look at the body composition of phosphates, so where can we find our phosphates? 85% approximately can be found in the bone in the form of calcium phosphates. There's a little bit found in the blood, and then a lot of it is also found in the tissue in the form of in protein. So now we know what phosphate does and where it can be found in the body. Here, just some dietary phosphorus requirements. These are numbers that are published by the National Research Council. These are just guidelines, and I just want to summarize it here for your convenience, and these are shown in available phosphorus. As you can see, the variation depends on the species of the animal, and also the age of the animal, and more importantly, the stage of the animal is in. For example, if you're pregnant, you need more phosphorus than just an old animal that is mature and it's not growing as fast. As I mentioned earlier, phosphorus is responsible for body growth, body weight gain. So when you're not gaining, you actually don't require that much. So this is just summarized here for your convenience. Next, we want to look at why that's the case. In today's animals, what we're doing is I've taken an analogy in a race car. We're actually feeding a race car. These animals are growing faster and faster. They are reaching market age at a lower and lower time, and their feed to gain ratio is getting lower and lower. So the animals are digesting more feed, growing faster and growing bigger. So it's really important to feed it with the best ingredients, the most available, and the most nutrition. I take that analogy to a sports car. If you have a Ferrari, naturally you want to buy the best fuel, the best gasoline for it. You don't want to put low quality gasoline in your Ferrari because you're not allowing your Ferrari to perform to its maximum potential. This is the same thing we're doing here. Aside from just nutrition, the aspect of nutrition, we also recognize that genetics has a significant role here to play in these performance gains that we're seeing over the years. In this picture on the top, these are carcasses of animals with 1957 genetics. It's fed with the feed of the 2001. So modern feed, old genetics. The bottom, you see the modern genetics coupled with modern feed, and you can see the performance gain. It's quite staggering when you put it together. I like that. So it's just to reinforce that not feed and feed quality is one portion, genetic is one portion, but we couple those together. When we couple those together is when we see the most benefit. And I assume that you guys are experts in your field, and you are using the best genetics available to you in your animal breeding, animal growing environment. So today, let's focus on the feed. As we know, aside from genetics, we know that there are other factors that contribute to body growth, and that there's variability in the feed that we need to really hone in, focus on to make sure we get the maximum amount of performance in the animals. This is just an example. Calcium. Calcium is also related to phosphorus absorption, and it can affect, say, the bone deposit in the animals. In the next slide, you can see that calcium and phosphorus is also important in body weight gain. So it's not only important you get the best genetics, but and the most nutritious ingredient, but you also need to make sure that the ingredients are in there at the right amount to extract the most potential in body weight gains in your animals. These are all things that are proven, well proven in the industry. So we're going to focus on phosphorus, and you know, we know that there are many sources of phosphorus. All right, we know that the different phosphorus has different variation in digestibility. They come in different forms. They come in different ingredients, and the ingredient have different physical characteristics. And we know all that coupled together makes us differently in your feed manufacturing process. And we know that any variation in that will impact birth rates, health, growth. We showed that in the graphs earlier. And eventually it impacts what we're selling, which is the production of the animals. Whereas it's meat, it can be milk in cows, or it can be eggs in laying hens. So we know that phosphorus, despite being a small percentage of feed, is really important that you get it right to maximize the production of meat, milk, and eggs. Okay, it's important that we pick the right ingredient that is contributing to the phosphorus in the diet and the phosphates in the diet. And we know that it can come in different form. It can come from the grain. It can come from many different areas. Okay. And how do we measure phosphorus availability? In the past, there are different methods that people use: water solubility, citric acid solubility. There is even a mass balance. But in our opinion, the best way to determine phosphorus availability is what we call an RBV, which stands for relative bioavailability. Okay. And in the next slide, I'll explain a little bit of what that is. RBV is determined, it's a reference standard. It's normally, we refer it, the test source, which is in the green bars, to a reference standard. And in the reference standard, we normally pick a very available phosphorus source. So the test source is normally common feed ingredients that will provide phosphates. In our case, it's MCP, calcium phosphate. We're also measuring the biological response in the animal against the reference standard. So in this case, we're measuring bone ash as a biological response. If we want to, we can also evaluate feed gain ratio or feed intake or body weight. Those are biological responses. And we think that's important because we not only want to evaluate how much we put in, but the effect is the most important. The effect of put in the animal's performance is the most important. So in this case, the deposit of bones is important. As I mentioned earlier, we have different ways of measuring phosphorus. We have the water solubility measurement method, citric acid solubility measurement method. Those are not good ways to measure phosphorus availability. Why? Because just because the phosphates are soluble in your solution doesn't mean it's absorbed. Just because it's absorbed doesn't mean it is creating a positive biological response. It can be absorbed and excreted at the end as fecal matter. All right. So in our opinion, RBV is the best. And then there's also the standard total tract digestibility that's very popular and very widely used. And the way we measure that is we measure how much phosphorus is fed to the animals. We measure how much fecal matter is excreted, and we measure the amount of phosphorus in there, so we know what goes in. We measure what comes out. So we just assume whatever is lost is in the animals. Those methods are tiresome. They have a tendency of having large experimental errors because of fecal matter collection, feed, all those variables, measuring the amount of phosphorus in the urine, for example. All those things can create complications in measuring using these kind of method to measure phosphorus absorption. So in our opinion, the RBV value is the most reliable way, and we normally measure it on a 21-day chick bone ash regression assay, and we think that's the best. Here we'll show you why that's the case. Phosphates need to be broken down into orthophosphate form, which is shown in the picture here, before it can be absorbed. So in the next slide, I'll show you how we make the phosphates, so that it can be broken down in the animal to this molecule, so that it can be absorbed. This is the molecule that's actually absorbed in our gut. Okay. There are two major ways of making calcium phosphate. The one on top is the single salt process, and that one creates a very fine MCP and DCP. At the bottom, you have the double salt process. That's when phosphate rock is made into phosphoric acid, and then calcium and limestone is mixed with that acid in a reactor and granulator and coming out with the MCP. In our opinion, this is the best way. This process creates the best MCP. And this is Nutrien's way of making MCP. And let me tell you why in the next slide. In our case of the double salt process, we actually make a molecule that has MCP and DCP, and they're locked in together with water for hydration. And that breaks down easily in the gut. Pure MCP form is a hydrophilic molecule, so it absorbs moisture. While it is good, it's bad at handling. It absorbs the moisture in the atmosphere and it cakes up. It's hard to handle. It possesses problems in the feed mill and the feed manufacturing process. Pure crystalline DCP in the single salt process is also unstable because it is a hydrophobic molecule. It rejects water, so it's not typically soluble in water because it repels water, so it's not available to the animal. In our experiment, which I'll share here, we compared different phosphate sources that we collect from all around the world to our MCP that we produce, that's 21%. We ran a RBV trial, so feeding chickens with randomized chickens, by the way, to different sources of feed, And at the end of the 21-day feeding period, we euthanize the chicks, and we measure the amount of bone weight in the tibia of the chicken. And that's how we measure how much phosphorus is absorbed and deposited and created the biological response, which is bone deposit. And we found that our MCP is the best at that response, okay? And generally speaking, monocalcium phosphate is normally more available than dicalcium phosphate. And the least biologically available phosphorus source is tricalcium phosphate, okay? The tricalcium phosphates are most of the time not water soluble, therefore it's not available to the animal. And in the next slide here, I'll show you, we collected these different phosphate sources from all around the world, and they come in different colors, different sizes, different granulometry. And I can tell you that color is typically not a good predictor of phosphorus quality. I can tell you that generally speaking, granulated material is more biological available compared to fine material. And our theory is that the fine material disperses in the trough in the feeding process, and it gets lost in the bottom of the trough, and it's not consumed by the animal. All right, so I also want to share this experiment done by Dr. Cromwell. In this experiment, Dr. Cromwell was looking at the effect of low phosphorus in diets affecting feed conversion ratio in hogs. As we mentioned, in this day and age, feed is already very expensive because of the high commodity prices. We saw earlier in the slides, Ben presented corn is expensive, soybeans getting more and more expensive. Therefore, it's so much more important that we focus on available phosphorus, making sure that the feed that's actually consumed is actually translated to body weight. There are two different responses to feed conversion ratio, of high adequate phosphorus diet and a low P diet. In this case, the low P high diet has a coefficient of variation in FCR of 11.7%. So what does that mean? So that means that the high FCR variation is directly attributed to lower phosphorus, meaning if you don't have the right amount of phosphorus in the diet, you actually have a higher amount of feed to gain ratio. So a lot of the feed is not translated to body weight gain, and that has material impact. Because remember, at the end of the day, we're selling the animals for its body weight. In a lot of cases, our eggs. So we need the feed to be translated to an animal biological response. Phosphorus is the most expensive mineral ingredient in a complete feed on a unit cost basis. So it's important to focus on the benefit that the phosphorus provides rather than the cost of the phosphorus itself. As we can see here, a coefficient of variation in FCR of more than 10% will result in a loss of $2 per hog in the feed cost per day, and this is per day. And in broiler, it's 7 cents per bird per day. So that's very important. So we know that there are different types of ingredients that have different phosphate sources. And why? Why is inorganic minerals so important? Inorganic minerals are important because it has a lower coefficient of variation in available phosphorus. In other words, it is the most reliable source of phosphates for the animal. So Nutrien produces that. We measure the amount of absorbed phosphate in the previous experiment, and it shows that it actually affect a positive biological response. In that case, tibia weight, tibia ash content in the tibia of the chicken. So there are other cheaper sources of phosphorus, but it can present some problems. In this slide, I'm just showing you here the variability of phosphorus and calcium in different phosphate ingredients. As you can see, the top three are inorganic sources that we manufacture. The last two at the bottom are fish meal, meat and bone meal. That's typically cheaper in cost. The problem here is it has a big coefficient of variation. The phosphorus is not always consistent. And earlier we showed that inconsistent phosphate, inconsistent amount of phosphorus will impact animal performance. So it's really important that we focus on the performance of the animal by dosing, by giving the animal the right amount of phosphorus, and avoid ingredients with high variation because it eventually costs us, right? We're already spending a lot of money for the corn and soybeans, and we want that to be translated to body weight gain. We want that to be translated to an animal performance. And the last thing we want is for our phosphate source to be the limiting factor, to limit that amount of feed to gain. And finally, Nutrien is a proponent of good phosphorus nutrient stewardship. We recommend that good nutrition practices needs to be practiced for dietary phosphates, just like any other nutrition. We believe that the right nutrient needs to be provided at the right rate, at the right time, the stage of growth, and at the right place, meaning that it needs to be in the feed and not the bottom of the trough where the animal cannot get to it. Okay, so Nutrien's phosphate is a reliable source of phosphorus that's available to the animal's digestive system, and it has a positive response in animal growth. And we hope that this slide here provides a good overview of why you need to continue to use inorganic phosphate sources so that you won't see a negative impact in animal performance. And that's the last slide I have. Thank you for your time and your attention, and for allowing me to share some of the exciting things that we're doing here in Nutrien. Thank you. All right, Santi, back to you. Actually, Christian, yeah.
Cristian, ¿tiene preguntas?
Buenas tardes para todos.
Good afternoon to everyone. So we are going to start with the questions that we got through the WhatsApp. All right. So we are going to start with the first question. What is the right source of phosphorus for? I had laying eggs. Okay, so I had chickens that are laying eggs. So what is the best source of phosphorus for this type of animals? Did you get the question, sir? Turn on the microphone. Okay.
I did. The best phosphorus
el mejor fósforos para
gallinas ponedoras is actually MDCP, because it is the most biological available. And the thing you need to be careful about laying hens is the calcium source. You also want to couple that with an available calcium source. That's something that's really sensitive to, especially laying hens, because it can impact the performance, so the eggshell performance, if you're not careful, if you don't have enough calcium in it. Does that make sense?
Sí, Luis, la respuesta correcta.
Okay, yeah, the answer was right. Yeah. Okay, second question. What is what is the digestibility and how will break down the nutrient phosphate is it? I mean, how much breakdown is there in the nutrient phosphate in your phosphate, and what is the digestibility for the animal?
When we compare our digestibility versus sodium phosphate, which is our reference standard, our digestibility was 98%. When compared to the reference standard. That's what we showed earlier, the graph, remember? The red and the green. The red one was sodium phosphate, and the green one was our product, and it was 98% of sodium phosphate. The reason why we picked sodium phosphates is because it is the most soluble source, most available source, breaks down easily in the feed. The reason why feed manufacturers like yourself don't use it is because it is more expensive. Yeah, there are other cheaper sources of sodium for the feed manufacturing. So that's normally the case.
Okay, muchas gracias, Luis.
Thank you. Thank you, Edward. The color and the granulometry of the phosphate affects the digestibility and the breakdown. This compare with the other phosphates from the market. Okay, so the grain size and the color, does it affect the digestibility within the animal?
The color does not affect the digestibility. It's like a red car and a white car. Which one's faster? Color does not affect the performance of phosphates. But what I can tell you is the granulometry is important because of the way you mix and manufacture feed. When it's too fine, okay, it typically gets, it doesn't mix well in your mixer. That's number one. It possesses handling issues. So when that happens, right, you're not giving the phosphate to the animal. It breaks down, and the dust settles at the bottom of the trough, and it's not in the feed itself. It's not in the pellet itself. Sometimes it gets sticks to the inside of the pellet mill. It doesn't get mixed well, so it sticks to the side. It's not actually pushed into the feed. So your feed would have no phosphorus because it's all in the equipment. So that's why granulometry is so important, because it helps deliver that phosphorus to the animal. All right. Does that make sense? So the granulometry is...
Sí, muchas gracias.
Yeah, good.
Ok, pena. Bueno, vamos con la siguiente pregunta, Luis.
Okay, next question. What is the useful life? What is the useful life of a phosphate? I mean, if you store it under the right conditions, if you have it at the right warehouse, how long can it last? Being stored in a storage.
Yeah, inorganic phosphates are inorganic, so they don't disintegrate, and they don't. We recommend 2 years. It's good for 2 years if you store it in the proper conditions. And what I mean by proper is it's not under the rain, it's not stored outdoors, it's not stored in high humid environments. The only thing that can impact that is caking, right? As I showed you, some of the molecules are hydrophobic and hydrophilic, so it can absorb moisture from the air and cake, and then it wouldn't be good for manufacturing feed manufacturing in that case. But for our case, nutrients, phosphorus, calcium phosphate is the most uniform in size. When it is uniform and its granules are nice and round, it actually is stable in the bags that we send to Colombia, and that way it won't create any caking issues. It won't clump up. Does that make sense? All right. If you buy fine calcium phosphates, all right, that is monocal, it'll absorb the moisture from the air and clump up, and then you have a brick. And what good does a brick do to you? Nothing.
Perfecto, Luis, muchas gracias por la traducción. Vamos con la siguiente pregunta.
Next question. The phosphorus, the phosphate, can affect the hormonal behavior of cows? Can affect them in some way, cows?
I'm not familiar with phosphates affecting the hormonal fluctuations in cows. That one I'm not too familiar with. I need to get back to you on that. I know that phosphorus is important in cows' reproduction. It does. Without phosphorus, you will see the calving rates go down, and without phosphorus, you also see milk production go down in cows. But as far as affecting the hormones, I think it does positively affect reproduction, if that's what you mean.
Perfecto, Luis, muchas gracias. Vamos con la siguiente pregunta.
Next question. Phosphorus is the same being used as fertilizers. How can you identify a phosphorus that is not being used in agriculture? Okay, because you use the same phosphorus to feed and as a fertilizer. So how do you define what is what?
You don't use the same type of phosphorus for feed and for fertilizer. That's number one. You can chemically test it, okay, to differentiate between the fertilizer phosphorus and the feed phosphate. Or in your case, you can just buy from a reliable source that is Somex, and Somex buy from a reliable source that is Nutrien. Nutrien, as Benjamin told you, we produce feed grade material and feed grade phosphate, and our feed phosphate is manufactured in dedicated plants that only manufacture feed phosphate, no fertilizer. Fertilizer is manufactured in another separate site, thousands of miles away. Okay, so you are assured of a quality product fit for feed use, okay, and a reliable source and a reliable supply. Does that make sense? If you need to test it, if you need to know feed grade phosphate sources and fertilizer phosphate source is very different. Normally in fertilizer, what they use is ammoniated phosphates. Okay, feed grade phosphates are not ammoniated. Okay, so it doesn't have ammonia. That's what that means.
No, perfecto, Luis, muchas gracias. Vamos con otra pregunta de un distribuidor de fosfato. Él dice que
okay, he's a phosphorus dealer. He distributes. How can? Okay. 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 Let's say I am a dealer, and I sell Summits. All right. So what can I tell my customers? What is the difference between you and the rest of the phosphates up there? I mean, what can I tell my customers? Listen, you have to buy this because this is top nacho right here. All right.
Thank you for the question. You need to buy from Solmex because Solmex buys the best calcium phosphate from Nutrien. Why does Nutrien produce the best calcium phosphate? We showed earlier, right? The relative biological value of our phosphate is the highest when compared to other sources of phosphate. For example, phosphates from Morocco, phosphates from China, those are inferior to ours when it comes to a biological response in the animal. And this is proven in experiments, okay? Nutrien did not just make a blank claims.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Luis. Luis, siguiente pregunta. En
Next
rumiantes,
question. Rumiants, which will be the granulometric to better the availability within the animal. In rumiants, you know, cows, horses, and whatnot.
What's your question again? Sorry. Ruminants?
What should, yeah, in rumiants, you know, what should be the granulometric, the best granulometric within the phosphorus to improve the availability within the animal?
So in ruminants, the granulometry is important because if it's about, I would say 600 to 700 microns would be the best, because any finer, all right, it will end up at the bottom, and any bigger, then you would have mixing issues when you're mixing it with the final feed. You want really a phosphate granulometry that's similar in size to the rest of the rest of the ingredients, so that you get a uniform mix in your feed. Okay, your nutrition is uniform across the board. You're providing a uniform nutrition to the herd, the whole herd. And to be exact, Nutrien produces a very uniform granular material around that 600 to 700 micron range.
perfecto, Luis. Yo creo que esta respuesta se ve muy acorde porque nos estaban preguntando la
Okay, so they were asking us about the granulometric with regards to the phosphatus, and what to do when it was too fine. So I believe that with this answer, the rest of the people can figure out, you know, what. So that will be all the questions, because most of the people, they were asking about the size. And thank you for the help within the interpretation.
You are very welcome.
Okay, gracias, and thank you, Edward, for the interpretation, for your kind words. Abra el micrófono, señor Sánchez.
Muchas gracias, Edward, por la presentación. Muchas gracias, Benjamin, también por tu exposición. Realmente nosotros sentimos mucha tranquilidad del respaldo que ustedes nos dan, y esperamos que ustedes, nuestros clientes, también la sientan en cuanto al abastecimiento, en cuanto a la calidad y a la estabilidad del producto que le estamos dando a nuestros animales. A todos ustedes, gracias por acompañarnos. Esta presentación va a quedar grabada para que la puedan compartir, para que la puedan ver. A las personas que se habían inscrito, pues les va a llegar también la grabación y que tuvieron problemas al ingresar. Nuestras puertas están abiertas, ahí están nuestros contactos. Vemos que hay inquietudes adicionales que no alcanzamos a resolver acá, los estaremos contactando. Y bueno, los invitamos a que sigamos en contacto y sigamos trabajando por el sector. Muchas gracias a todos por el espacio y que estén muy bien.